And today you're going to be talking about teen rebellion. Now, Cheryl, I've known you about 10 years, so I didn't know the pre-falling in love with Jesus, amazing follower.
What do you mean, Greg?
Well, you went through just a little teeny-weeny little bit of rebellion, maybe?
I might have been a little bit of a handful as a teenager, but that's all in the past.
That's the past. It's washed away.
But we're going to talk about that today. And you know, if you've ever been a parent for even 5 minutes, you know it's likely one of the toughest things you'll ever do on the face of this earth. And as you watch your children make decisions like I did with their lives, sometimes it's hard not to blame yourself for every one of their failures. But are there things parents can do to help ensure success? Rebecca Gregoire Lindenbach joins me today to talk about the view from the child's perspective and how a parent's approach can help steer kids right. And her mom joins us as well to give the parents' perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us. It's great to be here. Yeah.
I can't wait to hear from both of you. We're going to start with you, Rebecca. You wrote this book, Why Kids Didn't Rebel, or Why I Didn't Rebel. You interviewed your friends, you did research, but also you told your own story. So how come you didn't do what I did? How come you didn't rebel?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Right?
It is.
When I started writing this book, I honestly wasn't actually sure what the actual reason was, because it wasn't that there was one thing that made me stay following God's path for my life. It was a really complicated kind of myriad of things that all worked together. And so I really had to tease it apart by doing interviews and really reading back. I even read my old journals to look through my thought process back then. And really what we found is that a lot of the things that helped me and other kids not rebel were not what we're often told in the church is what works. It's actually a little deeper than what we're often told in parenting advice or with the sermons at church. It goes a little deeper.
Well, we want to dive into some of those reasons, but I just want to, Sheila, I want to ask you, and kudos to you too, because your mom's like rather well known,
yes.
You know, as a writer and blogger, and sometimes that makes it harder sometimes for kids not to rebel because it's hard, that public light, that spotlight, that busy life. You wanted her to write this book. Tell me what it was about, you know, what you were hearing from her that made you think, yeah, she needs to let other people know.
Well, it started from a blog post. I have a large blog at To Love, Honor, and Vacuum.com, and I was getting into these fights in the comment section every time I wrote about parenting teens, because I would say things like, you know, here's how to steer kids well, and parents would say, no matter what you do, kids are going to rebel. And I'd be like, oh, that's just so fatalistic. And they wouldn't listen to me. So I said to Rebecca, who was 19 at the time, could you just write me a blog post on why you didn't rebel? And she said no. And then one day she was bored in a stats class at university. She wrote it in 20 minutes. I put it up and it was seen by like 1 million people the next month. Wow. Totally viral.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, good for you. And I hope this does encourage people today. You know, I found it interesting because one of the themes that seemed to be about a lot of things you found was open communication with your parents. Things like respect for your kids, great relationships, explaining why behaviors are wrong, not just demanding obedience from them. So explain to me why a great relationship, open relationship with your parents matters.
Well, I think that often when you look at teenagers as these inevitably rebellious beings, they stop being people a lot of times in our minds, and they start just being this potential disaster.
And sometimes teenagers don't seem like people. Like there's
my
moments,
goodness, right? We're crazy. I say we. I'm not a teenager anymore. I say we, but no, they can be.
There's moments of craziness, hormonal
completely.
Pure craziness.
But when you're able to get past that and look at them as the person that God has created them to be, we start to shift our mindset. And a lot of that shifts the expectations we have around rebellion. The idea that, no, this isn't just a hormone-filled 14-year-old. This is also a person who God can use for great things and who has the ability to make good decisions. And that changes how parents interact with their kids, just having that different expectation around behavior.
You talk about that in the book. You expect bad things sometimes. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when you expect kids to step up and they see that belief from you, lots of times they do step up. I think that's so good. And another thing you shared in your book is that you struggle with emotional regulation. Like I think a lot of kids, especially like in that hormone, women especially, 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds, like there's this time of crazy, right? And you would behave sometimes inappropriately or outbursts and things like that. And Sheila, I think about you as a mom, you know, like you can respond, react, I think is the word, as a mom to that, and react wrongly, but you were able to just keep that vision of who she was and not kind of react to that. How did you do that?
Actually, I would say that I didn't. This was one of the areas where I really parented badly, and that's one thing that when Rebecca was writing the book, I said to her, you got to put all the stuff I did wrong in there, like, because this is not about being a perfect parent. Not, you know, raising a kid who doesn't rebel is not about parenting perfectly. It's just about being authentic. And Keith and I, my husband and I, when Rebecca would get moody, or when she would have tantrums, or just not be able to, she'd be so stressed for an exam, she wouldn't be able to calm down. We didn't handle that well, you know? But in the end, what we could do is we could go say, we're sorry. And wow, did we ever blow that?
That's
you know?
huge.
And she was allowed to say, Mom, you were wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing in a family.
That goes back to that relationship again, that healthy relationship.
Exactly, and that's what I found. I interviewed 25 young adults, both who rebelled and who didn't, and I found that there wasn't a single kid who said, my parents did nothing wrong. It wasn't about never doing anything wrong. It was about, how do you handle it when you do something wrong, right? Do you apologize, or do we try to kind of maintain control? Do you go and humble yourself and say, yeah, this was wrong? Now, you screaming at me because you were hormonal and emotional was also wrong, but the way I handled it wasn't beneficial.
And you're modeling how you want your kids to respond back to you by doing it first.
Completely.
I hope a lot of parents just took a deep breath and said, okay, you know, I cannot be perfect and still have good kids. You know, I mean, I think parents need to hear that. That's a message that you need to hear. We have many more tips to unpack for you on how you can steer your kids right in life. Stay with us.